All right, perfect. Well, welcome to How to Buy Cottages and Recreational Properties. So for those of you that have been on our webinars before, this is the first time that we are actually hosting this session. And the reason being is we've seen such a demand in cottages and recreational properties in the last year, if not even more than that. But with COVID-19, certainly they've become ever so popular. So we felt this would be a great opportunity to educate you on the ins and outs of buying these sorts of properties. So what are we covering today? First, we're going to talk about the GTA market trends, okay? Now, why are we covering GTA market trends? A lot of the people on this webinar are from the GTA, I'd say, and always the common question we get is, well, what's happening in the market? We'll then transition to the cottage property market trends. So what's happening in the cottage industry, cottage properties, price growth, the trends, etc. Then followed by our two panelists here, Rosa McLeod and Diana Cassidy Bush. We'll be discussing some of the top mistakes and what to look out for. Carmela Baptiste will be discussing the importance of financing these properties and the different types of financing alternatives and things to look out for there. And we'll wrap things up with next steps and how you can take action. And as well, we always will be telling you about our upcoming events and concluding with some thoughts. So first, a little bit about myself, Tom Powiewski. For those of you that don't know me, I was born to a Polish immigrant family. I've been raised here in Canada my whole life. Graduated from Wilfrid Laurier University in 2005, and I got a degree in accounting. I'm even a CA, a chartered accountant. But I want to say it was 2011, after being involved in investing properties, both flipping and rentals, I decided to get my real estate license just because I loved it so much. And for over almost 10, 11 years now, transacted in over 1,100 different properties. And of course, my two passions here, Alex and Nicholas, they're my two boys here. And for those of you who also are Blue Jay fans, I'm a diehard as well. So GTA market update. So we usually start off with this slide, which depicts the average price for a home on the Toronto Real Estate Board, okay? Now, our story starts off in 2017, where, for those of you who remember, we had this soaring market where there was a lot of demand and not a lot of supply. And we saw price growth 20, 30% in a matter of a few months. So alarming that the government stepped in April of 2017, so 4 years ago, announced something called the Fair Housing Plan, which included provisions such as a foreign buyer tax and stress test for mortgages, making it more difficult to qualify. As you can see, once that was announced, the prices went down just as fast as they went up. And for the last few years, they were gradually going up the way the market's supposed to behave. This over here, green circle, represents the basically 2020, 2021 with COVID. And you can see that last year, a year ago, when we had the first lockdown, that's where we saw prices go down 5, 10%. And the reason being is people were didn't know what to expect from the whole situation with an economy that was locked down, that we lost 50% of the buyers that were transacting. So not the price, but the number of transactions fell by 50%. The prices though fell 5, 10%. But you can see that it kind of quickly corrected. And that was because once the economy started opening up, people felt more comfortable with what was happening. Those buyers that left here came back here, and you can see that the prices resumed. Interesting enough, now I'm just gonna move my cursor over here. This is 2021. You can see just that huge surge. And this pretty much happened right after New Year's. It's as if everyone made a New Year's resolution and said, hey, I wanna get involved in buying property. And we've just seen that demand just go like crazy. Prices have gone up to new heights and levels. And when you compare it to 2017, you'll see that we have surpassed that by a lot. So we've reached new highs. To kind of put things in perspective, this chart here to the right compares March 2021 with March 2020. And you'll see a few stats that jump out. First, the number of sales. increased by 97%. So this number of sales means the volume of transactions, if you can believe it or not, went from, excuse me, 8,000 homes a year ago to almost 15,700 homes in March of 2021. So you can see that's a huge demand shift. Active listings though, which represents the supply of property available, was fairly steady. So 10,600 homes were available in March of 2020, 10,600 homes available March 2021. So when supply is the same, but demand is obviously a lot more, you see price growth, 21% from last year. Just incredible. Eric, maybe you want to shed some light. What are you seeing out there in the GTA market, just for our viewers there?
Well, we're seeing homes selling for higher than they ever have before, and we're seeing a lot of buyers almost overpaying to get into the market. It's almost this feeling of the fear of missing out, or FOMO, as a lot of our clients have started it as a be, right? So it's exciting. We've seen a few less bidding wars than we've had before in comparison to, say, for example, 21 buyers. You might have 5 to 10 buyers now, but it's still very fierce out there.
Yeah, to your point, Eric, like we have seen some plateauing in the market where now the competition is lessened and the prices are starting to level off. So it's showing some potential, some balance, which has not been the case for the last number of months.
Yeah, it's good for everybody.
Exactly. So we're going to jump right into our topic here, and our guest panelists, Rosa McLeod, Diana Cassidy Bush. They are our experts on cottages and recreational property. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So Rosa, if you could tell us a little about yourself and kind of the markets you served and your background there.
Hi, Tom. Rosa here. Just wanted to let you know, I guess I've also born to immigrant parents, Hungarian and Ukrainian. Also went into the accounting field like you and became a CGA in 1988. However, my passion for real estate has existed since my early 20s, and became an investor myself for a number of years, both in businesses and land development, recreational properties. Decided to get my license about 7 years ago, and work in both commercial real estate and residential. Really enjoy the cottage market. I've always loved waterfront properties, and truly enjoy helping people find their dreams. Amazing.
And what are some of the markets that you're currently serving?
Currently, I work in Prince Edward County as far as cottage properties go, cottage and land properties. It is absolutely beautiful there. I was born and raised in Belleville, as a matter of fact. I've been going to the Sandbanks Provincial Park, which I know you haven't been to yet, Tom, but we're going to bring you there. We have over 800 kilometers of waterfront in Prince Edward County, and it's called Ontario's Caribbean because we have miles and miles of sand beach, over 50 wineries, over 24 breweries. It is truly paradise.
Yeah, I hear good things about it. It's the, what do you call that? The Niagara region of the East. Is that what it's known as? Yeah. Yeah, I hear really good things about there. Well, that's great. Well, thank you for introducing yourself. Diana Cassidy Bush, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little about yourself and the markets you serve.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today, Tom. So I have been trading real estate for 5 years this April. I was born and raised in the Tweed area. So that's north of Belleville, north of where Rosa grew up, and basically lived here my whole life other than when I went away for educational purposes. Been enjoying waterfront with my husband. It wasn't something I grew up with. I grew up on a farm. But when I married my husband, he and his family had a trailer on Mazenau Lake. I don't know if you're familiar with Bon Echo Park.
Yep.
Yep. So we've been on the Mazenau for over 20 years, and we ourselves purchased a cottage not too long ago. And yeah, since I've before I was in real estate, I actually had my own landscape company. And a lot of the properties that I worked on were waterfront properties. So it just kind of evolved and has been a passion of mine. And basically the areas that we serve are within an hour radius of Tweed. And so that encompasses as far east as Kingston and north of there for the waterfront property. And then as far west as Marmora and as far north as Bancroft and
Quite a wide area you serve
it
there,
is.
eh?
It
How many
is.
kilometers do you put on your car each year?
Oh yeah, 40,000 plus.
Oh
So,
my.
yeah. So I now have a real estate team. I kind of focus on the listings now, and I have 2 buyers reps who do a lot of the running with buyers. But it's great because we're all from the area and we all know waterfront properties inside and out, and we're familiar with, you know, all the lakes kind of in between.
Excellent.
And we do, it is referred to as Lando Lakes. There's over 1,000 lakes in the
Amazing.
area that we service. So yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing. Just curious,
Yeah.
you've been selling for 5 years. How many cottages have you helped people buy?
Wow, I guess I should have prepared for that question. I would say,
Approximately.
you know, a few hundred.
Few hundred. Okay, so
Yeah.
we've got a lot of experience here to share.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
So kind of talking about some of the trends that we're seeing in today's marketplace. Maybe Diana, I'll let you start off, kind of maybe share with like kind of the trends that you're seeing, price growth. I mean, just kind of give our viewers here an idea of what we could expect and, you know, in the marketplace.
So just the stats, March 2020 versus March 2021, the average sale price is up 109%.
109%. So
109%.
So you got to pay double.
So the average sale price now is $757,500, basically.
757.5. And what would that get you think? Like, would that get me a lake, for example, or?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That would
A good sized lake with a 4-season cottage. Yeah.
Just curious, how does that compare to what you saw when you first started 5 years ago, as far as how fast properties are selling,
Yeah.
bidding wars, like put into context?
Well, even compared to last year, March 3, there were 3 property sales.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was like not a busy time for waterfront purchases. You couldn't see, you know, like basically a lot of them would have been still frozen. This year, that didn't matter.
No, clearly not.
No.
And what do you think that's causing that trend? Like what's causing the shift in demand there? I
think the shift in demand has to do with, well, we have a lot of people who can work from anywhere. They're not confined to getting to the office. The fact that they can get internet and really good internet in the area, so they can work from their 4-season cottage, and right now their kids can school from there as well. So where would you rather be?
That's very true.
So that's been a huge part of it. The other part is the travel restrictions. Has really, people still want a getaway, and cottage country, I think, is one of their only options.
Makes a lot of sense. Just curious, how many people do you find coming from like the GTA, like these kind of, you know, these areas like that, like from the city coming to areas like you to buy?
The majority of the buyers are from the GTA. Definitely.
Majority of the buyers are from the GTA. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And just curious, are they saying to themselves like, wow, I can, you know, for this price, I can get like one big property instead of a condo? Like, are they making those types of comparisons?
So I've had a few different types of buyers. Some are downsizing their home, and then they'll move into a condo in the city and purchase a waterfront property, and they've got both, right?
I see.
So I've seen some of that. I guess they're just home equity loans and they're purchasing. Some are moving as their primary residence, and we're seeing that across, like we do residential as well as waterfront in our rural areas. Waterfront, we travel further than the rural kind of listings, but that certainly is a trend, absolutely 100%, that people are moving this way for their primary residence.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I'm gonna give Rosa now an opportunity. Maybe you wanted to, Rosa, if you don't mind, tell us what's going on there in Prince Edward County. What are you seeing as far as price growth trends? You know.
Yeah. Well, from May 2020 to March 21, prices went up on average 42%.
42%. Okay, still pretty good. Still a lot.
It is, and it varies, of course, because when Prince Edward County, you know, like the area that Diana works in, is quite large, and there's quite a variation in prices and the types of properties available. But in March 21, there were 65 sales versus 28 in May of 2020. Don't ask me why I'm going to May, but I just got the statistics here. And 65% sold for above list price. You know, going back a year or two ago, this was unheard of in cottage country in our area. There continues to be an insatiable demand of people wanting to come down, either, and I find it's a bit of a mix, it's either people moving to the county as to become their primary residence, or it's for a cottage, a way to get out of the city for a while, pandemic included. And interestingly, you know, is the age, is that years ago, until fairly recently actually, there was more like retirees coming down to Prince Edward County. But what I've noticed is couples in their 30s with young children. Like,
I believe it because they can't go to Cuba anymore, right? They're going to somewhere else. They're going to Prince Edward County instead.
And more people are working from home. Internet has become more and more accessible, especially with, I know one big question we get from buyers is the internet. Like, you know, do I have internet? I can't be without internet if I'm going to work from my home or my cottage. Elon Musk, of course, has come up with this new product that apparently can work from a jungle. And so that's caused that to be less of a concern.
Interesting. See, the one thing I noticed too, right? So when I started selling real estate 10, 11 years ago, I did a couple of cottage deals here and there. And I remember the properties that we would go visit in Muskoka would just stay on the market for months and months and months. And we would be able to negotiate like 100,000 below asking easily. That's not happening anymore, clearly.
No.
No, you got to go like 100K over asking maybe.
I worked with Elizabeth Crombie, who's also with Royal LePage in Picton, and she and I had co-listed a property about 5 houses down from my second home, actually in the county there. And we asked 1,399. We just sold it last night for 1,530,000.
Wow.
There's a vacant parcel of land. It was 2.4 acres. It was on a point. It was probably priced really low. A house that needs to be knocked down. It was asking $399. It sold for $925 with 24 offers.
Okay, so clearly a lot of demand there.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So kind of let's move on to kind of the top mistakes and what to look out for from your experiences there. So how we're going to cover this is we have different sections. Some of it may crisscross, so we're hopefully going to kind of put them into different kind of compartments. First, we're going to kind of educate you as far as, well, what should we start when you're considering your search? You know, what should you start with? Followed with some waterfront property considerations, also the mechanicals that are involved. You know, cottage versus an urban property, much different. Year-round maintenance considerations. And we'll follow up with some condo resort properties. So again, some of the considerations involved there. Airbnb and short-term rentals. So again, we'll delve into, you know, what can you expect and kind of some of the considerations there, as well as inspections. So if you're considering buying a property, like a cottage, well, what can you expect from an inspection? How much does it cost, etc. Okay. So Diane, I guess, you know what, when, let's say, you know, you have a buyer approaches you from the GTA and they're saying to themselves, you know what, I'm gonna buy a cottage. Like, how do you guide them, or what are some of the considerations that they should consider, you know, before they start going out and search? What's really important, do you feel, for that buyer?
First of all, they need to talk to Carmelo and find out, you know, what they qualify for. It's the same as you would for a residential property. And then, you know, what things is he going to advise as far as what they would qualify for? And we'll get into that a little bit later, but are you going to use that property year round? And if you are, is the road a maintained road? Is, you know, can you use the septic system year round? Is there running water year round? Are you going to snowmobile? What kind of toys might you need a budget for too? Like Tom mentioned earlier, his parents purchased a cottage, and what kind of toys did your dad need, Tom?
Well, let's just say everything from a boat to a snowblower, you know, those types of items came up for sure. Let me ask you though, like, what do you think are some of the common mistakes people forget when they start thinking about their search? You know, what are some of the things that they're like, oh man, I should have thought about that at the time, or I didn't think about it until like halfway through?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I would say they forget about it, but I would say, you know, there's other considerations, things they may not be familiar with, things like what is the source of water? How's water coming into the cottage? Is it fed by a well? Is it fed by a dug well? Is it fed by lake water? And all of the above are fine. It's just if it is lake water, obviously, if you want it for drinking purposes and cooking, you would want to have a UV system on that. Septic systems are something else that people may not be familiar with, and neither one of those things are scary. It's just, and they're pretty simple to actually look after, but it's more just being aware
Right.
that there is some maintenance to do with those. And I think accessibility on like some of the cottage roads are pretty important, and who pays for the snow plowing if you're going to access it in the winter. You know, it all factors into the budget.
Absolutely.
What kind of activities do you like to do on the water? Do you need like a large boat, a pontoon boat? Do you just like to kayak and canoe, or a water trampoline for your kids? So
What do you recommend as far as like age of property? Like this, how important is that? And what do you typically would recommend?
For the age, you said?
An age of property, you know, an older versus a you know, a newer build. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So on a newer build, I think they're going to be in higher demand. But like any property, you probably want an inspection. And just because someone's holding offers doesn't mean there's no chance to do an inspection. We see people like doing inspections prior to offer date. Like, yes, they may be in competition and they may not get that property, but it's also a risk going in without inspections. Septic is one thing that, you know, if it's an older cottage, definitely needs to be investigated. What you might be up against there, because replacement cost on a septic system can be quite costly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Up to 20,000 probably.
Yeah, no, it's quite pricey there.
Yeah.
Rosa, how about yourself there? What do you like when you're working with a client, for example? What are some of the things that you have them kind of consider when they are going out for their search?
Well, outside of, you know, the length of the drive and buying in a good area in cottage country, because just like the city, you know, there are preferred areas where your value is going to hold and escalate more in time. And then there are the not so good areas, right? So One really important thing that, and I know it varies depending upon the county you're in, is whether you own the waterfront or not. I know in the county, most of the waterfront is owned. However, there's a couple of areas where it's not, and believe it or not, actually recently I heard of a horror story where there were some cottages up north that had boathouses and they had to remove them because they realized, oh my gosh, I don't own the waterfront. So make sure that is done. When it comes to heating, for instance, there are some areas in cottage country that have natural gas, and many areas, many actually, that don't have natural gas. So there are some cottages that just have electric heat. Some where you can have a furnace but use propane, which has to be delivered. So those are things that you want to consider.
How important is exposure? Just wondering, does that come up often with people that you want a south exposure, north exposure? How important is that? And what are kind of the pros and cons?
Personally, I love sunsets. And, you know, most people do look, you know, to face, is it west, I think? I forget now.
Yeah, it's west.
Is it west? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You have a sunset. But then there's others that are early risers, not me, that prefer the sunrise. But, you know, there's more than that. I mean, it depends upon the view from your cottage property. You know, down in the county, we have the sandbank. So you're going to pay a premium to view the sand dunes. You're going to pay a premium to have a sand beach versus a rocky beach, you know, versus a cliff, for instance, right? So always consider those types of things. Also, you know, I mean, people are different when it comes to, just like in the city, okay, do you want people really close to you? Do you want to have neighbors that are going to, you know, to socialize with or not? I know for me, I preferred being in a community, so to speak, so that, you know, if I was ever there alone with the children, I'd have someone to reach out to if we were ever in trouble out in the lake. Other people prefer just to be secluded. So one has to think about all of those things, right?
Absolutely. Just to kind of give you, you know, an experience that I had, actually, my folks in their 60s bought a cottage up in Muskoka. And one of the things they didn't realize was there was no garbage service. They only found that out once they moved in, and they're wondering what day did they collect garbage. And sure enough, they found out that they had to do it themselves and become their own garbage men by hauling it all the way to the dump. So for some of you that I'm not aware of, that might be the case. Again, not a big deal, but you know, for them it was a surprise.
Oh, big enough indeed. I'm spoiled. I've got natural gas where I am and garbage pickup, so I'm very happy.
I think that's rare. Both of those things.
Another thing I do want to consider is
Sure.
The level of the lakes. I mean, the level of the lakes has fluctuated quite a bit. So if I were searching for a cottage now, I would not want to purchase one that is on very, very flat land. For instance, I know where I am on Westlake, the water level is about 3 to 4 feet lower than it normally is. In 2019, it was about 5 or 6 feet higher. So, you know, there were some properties that were flooded. The insurance companies really, most of them, you know, don't want to cover flood insurance when it comes to a cottage as a result of that. So just beware of that.
Well, it's a great segue to our next section, waterfront properties. I know that they are in demand. Not everyone, but most people I think are always looking for a lake or maybe river or some sort of water at the end of the day. But
sure.
Diana, maybe you want to touch upon some of the big mistakes or some of the considerations people should make when considering buying waterfronts.
So as Rosa mentioned, whether people own or don't own the shore. So here in the slide, it's talking about a shore road allowance. So just so people understand, back when municipalities and townships were being laid out in the early 1900s, they often, if there was a body of water, they left a 66-foot road allowance around those lakes so that they could navigate around them. And in many cases, or in some cases, those road allowances have been closed, and whoever owns the property owns it right to the water. But I'd say, yeah, it's still something to be aware of, that it's just a question that you need to know whether there is a shore road allowance in front of that property, or whether it's owned right to the water.
And how do you find that out? Just curious. Like if I'm a buyer there, like how would I?
So it is on the list. It's on every listing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question about waterfront property, so it does show up on the listing. So any realtor showing the property, they should be aware of that, and disclosing that information to their buyers.
Okay, great. So it's a standard sort of feature item
Yes.
to disclose.
Yeah, I recently had a property for sale, and the whole entire cottage is on the shore road allowance, and the seller does not own the water or the shore road allowance. But back in, the early 70s, when the cottage was built, that's like every single cottage along that row is on, like they're all in line. So they weren't owned, and over time, the other properties on either side of them have purchased theirs. This gentleman inherited the property from his dad, and his dad never purchased the shore road allowance. So we just disclose that. That particular municipality does sell the shore road allowance. So yeah, there's just
excellent.
There's little surprises, good information to know and be aware of.
Just curious, like, what is a premium in your marketplace? What is a premium for having waterfront versus no waterfront, give or take? I know maybe it may depend upon the size of the lake, but just in general, what do you find is like the difference in pricing?
I don't really think that it's priced that differently, but in order to purchase it, you're looking at about the biggest cost is a survey, to get a survey, and then the time to do it. And
right.
it's
no, I mean as far as, let's say you had a cottage that didn't have any water, so it's just in the middle of, let's say, a forest, versus it backing onto like a lake of some sort. Like, what do you find is the on average price difference in your marketplace?
So a lot of what I sell, when we refer to cottage, we are talking about waterfront only. But if, like, I know in the county, it's basically like a rural property, or a second property is referred to as a cottage. So, and I mean, it can be anything to anybody. I think if you're not on the water, obviously it's much more affordable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And what do people kind of prefer? Deep lakes, shallow lakes, rivers? Like, maybe you can spell out kind of the differences between, the advantages and disadvantages between a big lake, a small lake, and having riverfront, for example.
Okay, so with a large lake, people are often looking for water sports like sea-doos, wakeboarding, water skiing. Just being able to get out on the water and spend a good amount of time out there as well when they're out touring. The smaller lakes are often like a little bit quieter, a little more peaceful, more fishing boat. You can still have motors in several of our small lakes. So typically then you're looking at like a smaller pontoon boat, a smaller fishing boat. And then of course kayaks, canoes, and you can do that in big lakes as well. Rosa, do you want to talk about the big water that you have out in the county?
I certainly can.
Okay.
Yes, there is quite a difference. I mean, we have several lakes, but a lot of the waterfront is right on Lake Ontario or the Bay of Quinte, which is adjacent to Belleville. And depending upon where you're at, you can have a dock or you can't. If you're out in certain areas where the water is rough and you are right directly exposed to Lake Ontario, you can't really have a dock and you can't park a boat. So if you're an avid boater, that's something to be on top of. Yeah.
That's important for sure. I mean, if you definitely want a boat.
It really is. Mhm.
Yeah, like I know, like my again, my folks, they bought that cottage. So again, the depth of the lake will dictate also the type of boat you can get, of course,
Absolutely.
the size, etc. In their case, I don't see a lot of those, yachts. The lakes are just not big enough, basically, for those types of boats. I'd say more like 20 foot.
Yeah.
Just curious. One thing that I know that came up too was algae. I don't know if you've ever come across that issue with algae being in any of your lakes, and Diana or Rosa as well. I know this came up with a client of mine that was considering buying a cottage property, and then when he did some research, he found out that there was this algae issue, which obviously is not good to swim in. Could you maybe shed some light on that?
Sure. I mean, algae can occur from time to time, more so in certain areas than others. So my best advice is to make sure that, with whichever realtor you're working with, that they know, what typically happens on that lake. And it can vary from season to season and month to month as well, right? So you definitely, and then ask people in the neighborhood. If you're looking to buy, like, ask the neighbors, hey, do you ever have a problem with this or that? It may relate to algae, it may relate to something else.
How does someone find that out in general, besides talking to neighbors? Is it some public?
You could even contact the Ministry of the Environment, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know. And do you
Yeah.
find them generally in the smaller lakes or in rivers, or where do you generally find that?
Personally, it can happen. It can happen out on Big Lake, Ontario. It can happen on a smaller lake.
Mm-hmm.
It really does vary.
Okay.
Although I had a small pond or something, obviously you're going to experience it more so.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Let's kind of move into some of the mechanicals here. So, for those of us like myself, I live in a suburban home. The city gives me my water. I have sewers. I get electricity. I have gas. I have all these things. So perhaps, Rosa, I'll let you kind of touch upon some of the differences that people can expect when they're buying a recreational or cottage property there with respect to mechanicals.
Right. So I think the biggest difference is Diana spoke to early, and that is septic and well. And I know a lot of people can get very, very overwhelmed about it. But it's important, but it's not like a deal breaker. You get used to it. Septics, quite frankly, as far as the maintenance, it can be every several years, right? It's not as though you have to have it, pumped out every month or anything. It depends upon the use and the size of it, right? When it comes to wells, the biggest thing you want to be aware of is make sure that you have sufficient water supply. And most direct waterfront properties, it's not an issue. It still can be sometimes. But beware, if you get away from the waterfront, there are certain areas in all of Ontario, as far as I know, where, there's very little water supply and the well can go dry. So.
Really? So how do you measure that? Like, how do you avoid such an issue?
You do an inspection, you have a well water test done, you make sure that it's, the minimum gallons per minute that the bank requires. And if it does become an issue, then a plumber can input something called a trickle system, which, or you can put in water tanks, but it's just something that you really need to do your homework on. Most waterfront properties are fine that way.
Between the wells, going back to that, I know there's the different types, but which is the best system? Is it a lake intake? Is it drilled well, dug well? And maybe, maybe we should explain to people what those are essentially, right? Before we get too deep, but could you maybe expand on that?
Sure. You want me to? Yeah. Okay. So, I don't know what Diana's comments on this are. I wish I was more of a plumber and well expert, but I personally have a shore well. I've never had an issue with it. The water is drawn in from the lake. It's right by the lake. And I have a peace of mind with that. Drilled well, if you get into a vein and you've got plenty of water supply, obviously that's fantastic. But, what if that changes? I don't know, Diana, what are your comments on this?
I personally wouldn't say one is better than the other. If there is a high water table, a dug well is a great option. So basically, dug wells are typically about 25 feet deep or shallower. And they basically dig out so that you're pumping out of the water table. And versus a drilled well that goes down much deeper, can be, hundreds of feet, like 100+ feet deep. It just depends on where they hit the right amount of water. Both are great. And the lake intake it's very, very common. I think the Ministry of the Environment actually prefers on lakefront properties to have residents draw from the lake versus, drilling into the water table.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, so then it's just a matter of, with a drilled well, a lot of times you don't have to worry so much about contamination. With a dug well and a lake intake, you probably need a UV light to and a filtration system to have potable, like drinking water.
Right. And how often do you test for that? I understand that you take the sample to the municipality and then they'll test it, but how often do you do that?
So typically it's done for a real estate sale, but on a regular basis, if you don't have a UV light, then you would, I think it's recommended to do it a couple of times a year, like in the spring after runoff, and then again in the fall. But if you have a UV light, then as long as you're keeping the bulb replaced, and typically they last a year, so 365 days, and there's a little counter on it that tells you how old the bulb is. It counts the days backwards. And yeah, so if you keep that up, then you really don't need to even test the water.
Okay. And as far as maybe, and Diane, as far as the heating, there's different ways these are heated. Like in my house right now, like I said, a suburban home, we got gas, but
yeah,
what can someone expect when they're going out cottage hunting?
So often people love to have a wood fireplace or a wood stove. So with that, it's important to note sometimes you need a wet inspection, and that's just a certification that the insurance company would require, stating that it was installed to wet standards. The wet, what does it stand for again? Wood Energy Technology Certificate. So it's like a standard that it's installed to insurance. Everybody's kind of got a quality of standard there.
And the insurance requires it, is that right?
Yes, I believe if it is a fireplace and it's built in, like there's certain times when you don't need it. If it's like a built-in fireplace, but it's always good to talk to your insurance company to verify before, going in, before you use it for sure. I know a lot of times people are submitting, there you go, wood energy technology transfer. So,
remember that for the test.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, that kind of threw me off a little bit. Yeah, if you're going in without conditions, which is what's happening in the market right now, you can do so without the wet certificate, but prior to using that wood stove or fireplace, you can get it done yourself. It costs to have somebody come out and certify the stove or the fireplace. It costs about, I'd say anywhere from $300 to $400.
Okay.
And then if it doesn't pass, then there could be additional costs to get something in there that would would satisfy the insurance company.
All right. Just curious, electrical, I'm going to touch a little bit about this. Generators. Do you recommend having a generator? Is it necessary?
Well, I grew up in rural Ontario, and to be honest, we don't get power outages very often. Maybe like, maybe 3 times a year. So it's just depends on how comfortable a buyer would be. You can have, flashlights, candles, and all that sort of thing on hand. If you have a heat source that will run in the winter without having electricity, then I'd say it's a personal preference.
Personal
honestly.
preference. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Perfect. So kind of moving on to this slide here, the year-round maintenance. So maybe, Rose, if you wouldn't mind maybe touching upon, like, versus, let's say, a city home and you've got this cottage, like what are some of the things that we should consider that goes along with buying a cottage at the end of the day? What are some of the maintenance things that we should be budgeting for and thinking about?
You bet. One thing I just want to mention before we get into this with regards to well water is, and Diana's right, just like in the city, many offers are going in without conditions. You want to put in a clause, it's not a condition, is saying that the seller will submit a water potability test with 0, meaning, 0 bacteria prior to closing. So a little tip that I do recommend everybody do. So with regards to, your snow and all of the other things that come with the dock, if you're not going to be there in the winter, there certainly are services there that will look after your snow shoveling for you, your grass, your leaves. You just have to find them. And as far as your docks, it's usually a separate company that will take it in and put it out unless it's something you can do yourself. Again, when it comes to the level of the property, if you have a dock that's on wheels that you can just wheel out on your lawn, great. If you have a seawall or a cliff, well, it's a different story. Pest bugs, like in certain areas, there are spiders, people come down from the city, it's like, oh my gosh, there's spiders. Well, you can have that sprayed once a year by a company. It might be spiders, it might be flies, and literally it decreases it significantly. And again, there are companies for that. Yes, most cottage countries have the monitoring companies and cameras, of course, when it comes to security.
Do you recommend them yourself?
I used to have that I bought 20 years ago where I am now, and I used to have it, and then over the years, I got rather relaxed. I know a number of neighbors that don't even lock their doors. I don't recommend that, but I guess it depends where you're at. If you're in a more secluded cottage, though, where you don't have neighbors, I would say yes. I mean, yeah, but you know what? Theft happens. It can happen anywhere, anytime. So depends what you have in your cottage or your home. Yeah. The maintenance of septic is really quite easy. Like once every 2-3 years, you can have it pumped out. Yes, you were talking about consider buying a pickup truck. And I know your parents, gosh, they went through that garbage situation where they have to look after their own garbage, and that's unfortunate. But regardless of that, it is nice to have a pickup truck or an SUV. It's not only to carry things around in, but even to think of water toys. I know when I bought my cottage, I had 2 kids, 3 dogs, and their friends that would come down. So my SUV would be full to the brim, and we would have a great time. And yeah, I guess that covers, I'm just looking at your screen here, for people that are not into maintaining a cottage, then consider a condo. There are resorts out there that do have the condo alternative where you have access to a pool and a dock and maybe even a restaurant, and you can socialize with people.
Right.
Again, it's really a lifestyle. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Diana, I know there was a lot touched on there. Is there something else that you want maybe to add as far as maintenance is concerned that people kind of forget sometimes?
So I brought it up earlier, maintenance of the road accessing the property.
Mm-hmm.
So some of these cottages can be on a municipally maintained road. So that means that the municipality is plowing just like you do in the city, plow the roads. And often if it is a municipal road, they're maintained for school buses. So they're plowed out early in the morning and, kept clear throughout the day. If you are on a private lane, who's responsible for plowing the road, if anybody? Do you need to buy the road that I purchased my cottage on is not maintained in the winter, but we use it year round. So we bought a side by side, like an ATV with tracks so we can get in and out. And we have the back compartment for taking our things in and out. Are you a snowmobiler? Do you want trails? Back to the roads.
What do you find is like the cost of plowing? Obviously, it depends how big your road is.
Yeah, it definitely varies depending on your road, and yeah, it can vary. I have some cottage buyers that have purchased, and it's been $100 for the year, summer and winter. And if you're the only one on the end of the road and you want it plowed, you might be looking at $100 a plow. So it's just a question to ask as far as accessing the property and what the access is like when you want to be using it.
Yeah. Do you find it's easy to find, like, let's say I want to subcontract all that, right? Like, I don't want to plow. I don't want to cut my grass. I don't want to blow.
Welcome to dealing with a local realtor because they have all the connections.
There you go. There you go. Because
Yeah.
I'll tell you something. I'll go back to my folks again.
Yeah.
They're struggling to find good tradespeople in the neighborhood to do stuff that are reliable.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, I would say buddying up with a local realtor, they know the people. And I would just want to mention one more thing to be conscious of is grass cutting. So do you want to spend your weekends cutting the grass? Do you want to buy something that's, wooded and there's no grass to cut? There's lots of those things to consider. So.
Exactly. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't be that person. So
Yeah.
kind of a little bit of segue here. We'll touch a little bit about this for those people that are like thinking, you know what, like myself, maintenance is not for me. I don't want to cut grass on the weekends. I don't want to shovel. And I prefer something where, you know what, I can just unpack my bags and relax. And there is this option, of course, now resort style sort of, I'm gonna call them cottages, sorry, condos. Not many, but there are. And just, again, I don't know if you want to touch upon some of the advantages or disadvantages to this sort of lifestyle than perhaps your traditional sort of cottage. Rosa, do you have any thoughts on that?
Right, so I spoke to it a little bit just before this slide. And yeah, it's a very, very individual thing for those people that, don't have the time or the energy or the expertise to deal with maintaining their own properties. This is a wonderful alternative. I do think we need more of them in Ontario. But you do want to be aware of maintenance costs. Definitely, it's the same thing as like buying a condo in the city. You have to decide if the maintenance costs are worth it. But you are, so fortunate in the sense that you do have amenities. At the very least, usually a pool. It might be a golf course. Boating. I see you've got a picture of a harbor there. I don't know if that's Friday Harbor or not.
That's Friday Harbor, yeah.
It is. I thought it was. Yeah, I have a friend that owns a couple of units there. It's great. And you have access even to a restaurant. Yeah, but do find out if you have pets, make sure that they're allowed. And of course, the status certificate, make sure that the condo corporation is in great shape. But no, this could be a wonderful alternative for people. Mm-hmm.
Diane, in your market, you don't have this sort of this option, right? This is fairly kind of limited.
There's a couple of timeshares. There is different types of ownership too that that is in my area that isn't common everywhere. There's cooperative ownership.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like smaller lots, but the whole property was purchased by like a corporation, and then everybody individually owns their own cottage. So there's different types of ownership as well, and lots of ins and outs to be aware of with those as well. But I do think for affordability purposes going forward, I think we will see this type of ownership with waterfront properties becoming more popular.
That's a good point, right? The fact that, you know, when those prices keep going up so high, and the demand will be there, but the affordability may not be. This definitely will be a trend that we might be able to see unfold since this product is such in demand. Okay, great. So Airbnb. So interesting enough that, like myself, I'm always thinking, well, you know, this expensive cottage, I'd love to offset the cost of ownership by renting it out to people, because I'm probably not going to use it 365 days of the year. And I'm sure this is something that's common in your marketplace, but what are some of the things that, you know, someone should consider if they're thinking about Airbnb-ing their cottage? Diana, maybe you want to just share your experiences there.
So I think Rosa will have a lot to talk about with this as well, because I know Prince Edward County has implemented some regulations around short-term accommodations. So I'll let her speak to that because she's more familiar with those restrictions, but it's just something to be aware of. There are, in the area that I service, we don't have any restrictions, but I do see it coming up on municipalities' radar, and they're talking about it. They haven't implemented any changes yet. There are lots of websites for week-long rentals, not just Airbnb. That's common in our area and very popular, very, very difficult to even get a rental for a week, a cottage rental.
What are they going for? Just curious. What can someone expect to pay for a week or a weekend?
So I have seen people that have like a regular clientele and they've owned their cottage for quite some time. They have a difficult time increasing the prices to like people that are purchasing and now turning that property into an investment property. So people that have owned it for a longer time, I still see $1,200 a week, $1,500 a week. Newer, like more recent sales for myself, I've seen people renting cottages out for $4,000 a week. So there's a huge range. And I think if you are purchasing a property in cottage country and looking to do short-term rentals, yeah, like finding services, people to do the cleaning and the turnaround, especially if you don't live in the area, it's something to definitely consider. Internet, every one of my listings, I promote whether if there's internet there, because it's not a nice to have anymore. I think it's a need to have.
Well, that's great. So you're in the areas you service, there are no restrictions, which is great, because I know of a lot of different municipalities where they're not allowing Airbnb, or even Toronto, for example, they say you can only Airbnb your primary residence, as an example. So it's great that, people can utilize this opportunity, to offset the cost. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Rosa, Prince Edward County, I know it's really popular there. What are you seeing as far as trends with Airbnb and short-term rentals?
Well, Diana's absolutely right. I think the county was overwhelmed with the number of Airbnb properties or properties that were bought and converted to Airbnb rentals. So last year, the county decided that they would have to become licensed properties. There's an inspection process involved. There's an application process involved. And geographical limitations as to, how many can be in a certain area, rightfully so. And probably because, the local people couldn't find rentals or affordable properties to purchase, right? So this did have to take place. So as a result, you know, they have to charge an extra 4% for the rentals, the owners, 4% tax to the county.
How dare they? How dare they take advantage of these people, right? 4%.
Heaven forbid. So, as far as the rental rates, from what I've seen, 2,000 to about 7,000. There's probably
7,000.
one more expensive. Yes, right. Actually, just about 5 doors down from me, there's a property that, yeah, and so it varies quite a bit. Yes, I agree with Diana. It can be challenging for people to find cleaners in particular, but you know, they are there. As far as people coming in and looking for the demand has definitely increased. Because let's face it, buyers, they may want to use the cottage for their own purpose, but they're looking to offset their expenses and their mortgage payments by having an existing Airbnb property. So more and more often we're asked as agents, oh, is this an Airbnb? Is it approved? You know, is it licensed? All the time. Yeah.
Yeah. No, what I've been heard at least is, one, you can't even rent it for a weekend. You need to do a minimum week because the demand is so high. And so the owners don't want to have, of course, any, you know, vacancies, so they can do that. And what I've also, at least anecdotally witnessed, is I have clients that ask me, do you know anyone that wants to rent their cottage? Because I can't find anything available.
You know, it's a big reason why I bought 20 years ago. I mean, I had my first cottage before then, but then I thought, okay, we're going to sell that. We'll just, you know, rent at a resort. And then before you know it, it's sold out and you've got no place to go in the summer. So it's a big reason why I bought, because I wanted the security of knowing that I could go whenever I wanted.
Yeah.
And now it's become more of a home, like, you know, permanent home. So it's fabulous.
Maybe a side question, just wondering, with this whole lockdown, have they prevented people from going to use the Airbnbs?
Yes.
Have there been any restrictions on that?
The county health department, Prince Edward County, instituted a rule, and I hope I'm not repeating the wrong information, but I believe only people that actually live in the local area can rent Airbnbs right now. I believe that's the situation. So that's a drastic change, but this happened for a short period of time last year too, and then of course things improved and you know, the market became wild again. But so it's a bonus for people that have been looking for more long-term rentals, because some of those opportunities have opened up. But like with anything, this too shall pass. And you know,
yeah. Diane, is that the same thing in your area too? With the lockdowns, have they prevented outsiders from renting?
Yeah, short-term rentals, they've said, nope, everybody has to stay home. So as far as people accessing their own property during lockdown though, we certainly are still experiencing lots of volume on the highways during the weekend. So people are getting out of the city and enjoying their own cottages. Yeah. So
it sounds like they're not policing it too tightly.
No, they're not.
All right. So maybe we'll spend just a minute on this slide. Just wanted to kind of highlight to potential buyers the differences in costs and inspections that are involved, given the additional mechanical items that are involved. So Diana, maybe you want to touch upon just quickly, you know, what can a buyer expect when they're looking for a property and putting an offer and having a home inspection done? What does that look like?
So previous to this current market that we're experiencing, it was very common with every sale for people to be doing a full home inspection, and the prices that are here are very accurate. I'd say home inspection here around $450. The water test is, some of the municipalities are like drop-off points, but it's actually the health unit, or you can also do it to the health unit, and it's shipped off to be tested. So there's some timing issues to be aware of as far as getting water tests. I would say that if you've got a well and you're looking at a rural property, definitely, as Rosa mentioned, want to know what that well will produce. So there's an inspection or a flow test you can do on the well, and then a septic inspection on, if it's a brand new build, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you're probably fine. But beyond that, I think it's worth spending the money to have the septic inspected.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you're going to buy potentially $1 million asset, maybe more. I mean, even though the cost here will probably add up close to 1,000, if not more, definitely makes sense to invest that money. Given, I think you mentioned earlier, a new septic system is going to be about $20,000.
Yeah. So I would add to this list a wet inspection, because a lot of I work with inspectors that can do the whole thing, including wet inspection, with one visit. If you can't get that particular one and timing's tight, you can pull in different parties. So yeah, I would say you're looking at anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 to get everything.
Yeah, and just for everyone's, again, the wet certificate, that was for the wood burning fireplaces, basically, for insurance purposes. Perfect. Rosa, anything else to add to this slide before we move on?
You know what? One thing we haven't really talked about that much is whether it's a 3-season or 4-season property. And that gets to, is it a variety of things? I know Diana talked about this earlier about like the water supply, is it just a pipe that goes into the lake or do you have a well? Because that will make or break your difference between how, often during the year you can use the water. Is the property...
Sorry, I'm just going to interject. If it goes into the lake, if there's a heated line, it can be used year round. So anyway, sorry.
Is the property insulated sufficiently? Is it insulated at all? So those are things that you also want to look at. And I know what you're talking about, Diana. Yeah, I mean, I had a property where the first property I had years ago, we had the water line go in and we didn't have a heated system. So we took it out during the winter, but yeah, there are choices there. Yeah.
Oh, and maybe just for everyone's knowledge, again, we didn't get too deep into the 3 versus 4 season, but let maybe just quickly touch upon the difference aside from maybe the obvious, but whatever else you want to share about 3 versus 4 season cottages.
Well, outside of this, is it really built to be used in the winter? Diana did bring up a good point several times. The road going to the cottage, is it a municipal road that is snow plowed in the winter or not? Mm-hmm. If it isn't, then you're going to have to either share with other neighbors and hire someone to plow the snow, or skidoo in, quite frankly. That these are important things to be aware of. Yeah,
consider for sure. All right, well, thank you, panelists, for educating us on the ins and outs of buying a cottage. I know there's so much information out there. It's hard to just do it all in this one session, but you provide a lot of great information, a lot of golden nuggets. Definitely I learned a lot from this, so thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge today. I'm going to turn over now to Carmelo with the importance of financing cottage and sort of the important things to remember when you're buying a cottage. So take it away there, Carmelo.
Yes, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Rosa and Diana. You shared a lot of good information, and I learned a lot myself. My name is Carmelo Baptiste. I'm first-generation Canadian with an Italian background. Having that Italian background, I do talk a lot with my hands and my body. I graduated from Ryerson University way back in 2001 with an economics and statistics degree. I know a lot what's going on when you hear the news and all these stats and all these numbers. I know how to make sense of it and speak it in English language opposed to this economic language. I started my career right when I got out of university. I started my career as a mortgage underwriter working for the banks. So I know what the banks look for, what they think about when they review an application and properties. I am so happy and grateful with everything I have in my life. I'm very blessed to have a great godson who's 11 years old. With everything I have in my life, I do like to give back to the community. Over the past 10 years, I've gone down to the Dominican Republic to help the Haitian refugees that are down there. I do volunteer with my local parish and charities that are in Toronto, like Operation Head to Toe. And I've also built homes around the world for a Habitat for Humanity. So I love to give back to society for everything that I have. When it comes to cottages, we kind of briefly got into it. And doing financing in cottages, I could do financing in cottages anywhere in Ontario. And how the banks define cottages, they define it really as like 3 different types. So I just kind of want to keep it simple with an A-type cottage. An A-type cottages are those all-season cottages. There's a B-type cottage, which is again those 3-season cottage. And a C-type cottage are those cottages that are off the grid that Elon Musk likes to build and provide internet services towards. So tonight I'm going to talk about what defines kind of like an A-type cottage and the types of financing with each category. So an A-type cottage, I like to think about are cottages that can be used year-round, accessible year-round. They should be winterized and be able to winterize it. These A-type cottages have permanent heat sources. The water, must be either municipal water or well water. And the water intake from a lake is fine. The key thing is the banks look for is the water drinkable? Is it potable? That's what the banks want to know. At minimum, the properties have to have the standard, full kitchen, a minimum 1 3-piece bathroom, bedrooms, common areas, kind of like a home away from the city. The zoning could be either residential or rural, depending on where it's located. And one of the key things I noticed when you look at A-type cottages is the foundation. Is the foundation permanently secured in the ground? Is it installed below the frost line? If you do find a cottage that happens to have some crawl space or a basement, that kind of automatically tells you, it's dug in ground and it's secured and it's stable. Now, these A-type cottages are the most desirable cottages, and financing on them could vary. You could buy an A-type cottage with less than 20% down. You could buy them with as little as 5% down payments, provided the purchase price is $500,000 or less. The size of the mortgage you can get out of them, they vary. When you're buying with less than 20% down, the banks like to see the maximum mortgage amount being $600,000. Now, with this hot market we have in cottages, exceptions are reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And typically the maximum amortization you'll be able to get financing on is 25 years. Now, with these A-type cottages, again, you could also buy with 20% down payment or more. One of the key things is if you buy one of these A-type cottages and you want to say renovate it, you're also allowed to refinance on them. So you could buy a property that's maybe a little bit beaten up, put some grease work into it, do some renovations, and if you want to take equity out afterwards in that property because the value's increased, you're able to do that up to 80% of the value. The maximum mortgage amount will vary when you're putting 20% down on these A-type cottages, so it varies based on each bank, and you're allowed to get financing with a 30-year amortization. So that would help lower your payments and also help you qualify for more. Financing on these A-type cottages, the banks are financing it as you're owning it as a second home. So it's going to be used as an owner-occupied property, not as a rental. Cottages can vary in size based on the land. So if you're buying a cottage that has a really large lot, 20, 30 acres, the bank's only going to look at the value of the home and 10 acres. So that's keep in mind. How the banks kind of define the B-type cottages. The B-type cottages, I kind of like to think of it as a 3-season cottage. May not have road access in the wintertime. It could be on a little island and you need to get access via boat and it's not available in the wintertime as the lake freezes. The banks don't necessarily need to see that permanent heat source, like you would see in a 4-season cottage, but they do still require some sort of heat source with stove, fireplace, heat blower, propane. There's got to be, the building needs to be heated. There needs to be a water source. It does not necessarily need to be potable, but there has to be running water in the cottage. And a lot of times it's just usually lake water you'll find. The foundation does not have to be in ground below the frost line. It could be floating foundations in on concrete bricks. And if you're buying one of these, again, 3-season cottage, B-type cottages, the bank's financing you based on it's going to be as a second home. So it's going to be like owner occupied. Again, if you're buying a cottage that has a large lot and multiple acres, the bank's only really going to do the financing on the home, the cottage, and 5 acres. Nothing more. With financing on these cottages, you could buy them with as little as 10% down payment. Regardless of your down payment, even if you want to put 20% down payment or more, depending on the cottage location, the banks may still require mortgage default insurance. So we really need to find out where the property is located and the type of financing is available on these B-type properties. Regardless of your down payment, the maximum amortization is 25 years. And this is where, again, in the last year, how the value of cottages have increased so much in the past is the banks typically like to have a maximum mortgage amount of $350,000. That's clearly changing, and acceptance can be granted on a case-by-case basis. One key thing is the down payment needs to be from your own savings. No money's to be gifted. C-type cottages are the ones that are like Elon Musk like to have and build. Those are the ones that are extremely remote. They may not have a proper water system, a regular heating system. They may not be secured on the ground or a septic system. Those are the C-type cottages are the ones that are really remote in a rural area, not that desirable. So financing on a C-type cottage is actually quite more challenging than a typical cottage that most people look for. If you're looking at buying a C-type cottage, you may require 35% down payment or more. A lot of these C-type cottages are remote cottages, may not have financing available with your typical big 5 banks. So if you're looking to get financing on these cottages, expect slightly higher interest rates, maybe fees associated with the financing, and depending on the property and also the location, the financing may not be available. But when you get the mortgage, the bank that's securing the financing, it's all about location, location, location. Is that property marketable? Is it easy to resell? And these C-type properties or cottages are the most remote ones and not the most desirable and have the biggest market. Additional things to look at when buying a cottage. Diana and Rosa already talked a lot about this and shared some great information. Does the cottage have a filtration system? Get the water tested. The septic tanks, size, insulation of the septic tank. Does it still have a warranty on it? One thing to keep in mind when financing a cottage is I've seen a cottages being purchased with furniture inside. They come with some toys, snowmobiles, skidoos. Even I've seen a big John Deere lawnmower to mow the lawn. Keep in mind, the bank is really financing the building and the land. So if there's a lot of value being added to those additional items, it may not be at a price for that. So keep that in mind when you're buying a home and all the additional toys that it may come with. A bank's really only financing the property, not really the goods inside. The property, again, go back for a moment. Keep in mind, if you're buying a property near the flood line, the bank will need insurance on it. So make sure you could get home insurance on it, flood insurance. And same thing if you're buying a cottage that it's an acreage property. What's the zoning? Is the zoning actual residential rural, or is the zoning agricultural? Because if you're buying say a cottage that has like 40 acres and it's owned agricultural, well, now the bank's going to view that as a farm, not as a cottage. And now if you're looking at buying, we touched upon resorts, timeshares, rental pools, fractional interest, life leases. Those properties, the banks can't really secure a mortgage on the title. The title is not really, it's part of a bigger project. So getting financing on the resorts and those timeshares are really not available to the big 5. The last thing to do is when you find a cottage you like, what to do? Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to pre-qualify before you go out looking at cottages with Diana and Rosa. We're happy to help you qualify. You let you know that it's more the size of the mortgage you qualify for, because it's hard for the bank to give a firm pre-approval on a cottage, because as I kind of went over with, the type of cottage you buy really makes a difference on the financing that's available. Now, once you found a cottage, I know Diana and Rosa will be able to identify whether it's a 3-season, 4-season cottage, that A-type cottage, that B-type cottage. But if you need some help, that's what I'm here for. I could always forward me an MLS listing. I have all 3 mortgage default insurers, Canada Guarantee, Sagen, and CMHC on speed dial on my phone. I could call them up, email them the listing, and ask them, how do you define this property? What type of financing will you do? So I'm here to help to make the process easier. I'd like to share my contact info, and I'm here to, I'll be staying at the end to ask questions. And I know one question I get a lot is interest rates. Interest rates are extremely low. The interest rates you get on a residential home in the city or a condo in the city is the same rates that are available in cottages. There are no premiums to that. You could get a fixed rate, a variable rate, fixed rates from 1 year to 10 years, on variable rates, typically 5-year rates, and all of the above. The most important thing with interest rates is finding the right rate with the right term to match your goals with this property. Are you looking at buying a cottage where you know you're going to put some money into it and then you want to renovate it in a year or two? If you're doing something like that, I'd not really the biggest fan of getting a 5-year fix, because you may need to break that or when it comes to borrowing more money.
Perfect. Thank you, Carmelo, for sharing those golden nuggets there. I didn't know you still had a speed dial on your phone there for those guys.
I deal with the insurers on a regular basis. So if I have questions, I don't necessarily have to always go to my underwriter. I just call them directly.
Awesome. Okay, great. Just curious, Diana, have you dealt with a lot of off-the-grid properties at all in your market? Are those pretty common?
I just sold one this week. Yeah. So we do see them from time to time. I wouldn't say they're really common, but we definitely do see them. But yeah, again, if I'm working with a buyer, I would want them to be pre-approved, knowing what they're up against with financing on that and how that changes their pre-qualifications. Yeah.
And that buyer was looking for an off the grid, like they wanted that sort of secluded sort of property, or was it more?
Sometimes they're not that secluded. Some, like the one that I sold, was on one of the biggest lakes that I regularly sell waterfront on. It's just it was, these 4 lots were created, and I believe that probably whoever created them didn't know how big of a challenge they were going to be up against getting hydro there. And there was a neighbor that didn't want to cooperate and allow the hydro to go across their property, which blocked the other 4. So they had to make other arrangements for power. So.
Interesting. Okay. So it's just a matter of getting access to that. All right, everyone. So we're at the tail end of our webinar tonight. So for those of you that are interested in taking the next step and taking action, we're offering you the opportunity to get cottage listings sent to your inbox. So if you're someone that is looking to explore this world of cottage property and getting in there for the season, if you want to just type in the word cottage in the chat box, we'll be able to follow up, get an understanding of what sort of area you're looking for, type of cottage, and so on, and then point you in the right direction and get you some listings so you can start getting your feet wet as far as that's concerned. So if you want to take a moment right now, feel free to just type in again cottage, and we'll be in touch. And we believe strongly in education here. And as far as our webinars, we host one every single month. Next webinar will be how to create wealth through real estate. So we'll be discussing about rental properties and how you can acquire them and build your portfolio. So that's going to be happening Thursday, May 27th. We'll be sending you an invitation where you can register on Eventbrite. All right, so just to wrap things up here. So there's my contact information as well. And I want to also thank our guest panelists again, Rosa McLeod, Diana Cassidy-Bush, and Carmela Baptiste for their contributions this evening. Their contact information is featured there. So again, we will be publishing, or we are recording this. We'll send a recording of this. If you'd like to get in touch with them directly, by all means, their information is available. And as well, for those of you that have typed in cottage, we'll follow up with you directly, and we will take it from there.
Thank you, everybody.
So thank
Thanks for having
thank
me.
you for attending. We'll spend a few minutes. We got some time here for some questions. Eric is monitoring the chat box. Eric, if you want to maybe shoot over some questions, and we'll try to get as many as we can answered.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of them were answered live actually, but we'll just kind of go through the questions without going over things again too much. But I guess we'll go one by one here. So Diana, I'll ask you, what are your thoughts on the demand for cottages post-pandemic?
So I think that people, now that they're actually considering it, I don't think that demand is going to go away. I think in the past, Muskoka has just automatically come to mind when people think about cottages, and that for a lot of people has become unaffordable. So kind of expanding out to other areas has, I don't see that demand going away. I do think that's here to stay.
Yeah, I guess it's when people open their eyes to something, right, and see a different way of living. And also to your points that you made before, so many people are going to be working from home for the foreseeable future. Even if we do go post-pandemic, a lot of their companies and the people who they work for are seeing the benefits of having them work from home, especially cost-effective measures, right? So, yeah, that's great. So in your market right now, are you seeing any offers that have home inspections getting accepted?
I think because the demand has been so great and you know, holding offers, there's still, well, there was a property that one of my buyers reps showed over the weekend. Yesterday, I was getting updates and there was 31 offers. So I think as long as that demand is here, I don't think the realtors are gonna encourage their sellers to do the pre-inspections.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, that's the thing with any condition, right? It really depends on how the market is, and when you have that demand, especially like we're seeing in the GTA, it's very hard to get an offer accepted right now with that condition.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Rosa, I wanted to ask you the next question. So as an investor buying cottages, how many cottages do you think that you would buy? Rosa, you're on mute, and so is Tom. Trying to tell you you're on mute.
Whoopsie, whoopsie.
There we go. There we go.
So are you talking if I were an investor, how many I would buy, or how many cottages on average are purchased by investors?
Let's say on the second question,
Yeah.
on average, like how many cottages would an investor look to buy?
I would think of all cottage purchases that I've dealt with so far. I would give it like maybe 20% with investors, and saying that those investors would also expect a short-term rental income property. Yeah.
Yeah, so you think for sure that if they were investing in a cottage, they would be thinking about those weekly rentals, those $4,000 per month rentals that you're seeing right now, and
Absolutely. Or it might be a business. It could be a marina. It could be, you know, a winery. I mean, the door is wide open. It's quite fascinating, actually, on the different business opportunities that are out there.
Yeah. Now the other businesses in PEC, they wouldn't try to cut out the new guy trying to open up a winery, trying to get in on their scene.
I don't think so, really. No, you know, there's lots of land, there's lots of business opportunity. We get over 1 million visitors a year. So, and the population on average is only about 30,000. So there's lots of room for business opportunities there.
Okay, great. And this is actually probably the most fun question that I see here. And Rosa, you can feel free to answer it as well. How do you avoid wildlife like bears and cougars, for example?
Well, that's one of the things I really prefer about Prince Edward County, is that as far as I'm aware of, we don't have bears. We're too far south. I've never seen a cougar. I've seen the odd fox. So yeah, it's pretty placid that way, at least where we are.
The
Yeah.
one thing I've learned is don't have a composter outside, okay? For obvious reasons.
That's what, raccoons or who knows what. Yeah.
Bears mainly. That's
Yeah, invest in a bear bin depending on where you are. If there's bears nearby. Besides that, if you see a bear, you run as fast as you possibly can in the other direction. It's probably my best advice I can give from my own personal experience. So, Rosa, thank you so much for answering that question. Carmelo, are the banks going to easily finance a cottage knowing that somebody is going to half live in there and half rent it out? Like, how is that going to work with a bank?
That's a really good question. So when getting financing on a cottage, you got to get financing. You got to qualify based on just your own salary, your own income, not based on any rental income. Prior to, if you get successful getting that cottage, I don't recommend putting it on Airbnb or on any websites if you're going to be renting it out. Now, once the mortgage is closed and you got the keys and you own the cottage, what you do with the property is kind of on your own. If you want to, a few times a year rent it on Airbnb, you can. Just don't do anything prior to financing or buy a property that is actually listed on Airbnb. The banks want to, they're financing you based on you having this is a second home, not as an investment property.
So that's very different in comparison to a residential property, right? Because a lot of clients can get the benefit of having, say, for example, an income suite and getting a bigger mortgage. I guess that option doesn't exist for cottages.
For cottages, it's more of they're financing you as a second home, not as an investment property. That's the difference.
Yeah, that's a great answer to a very good question. So I guess, Diana, sorry, I'll ask you again. Are there any areas that you're working in that are very saturated with Airbnb or vacation rentals?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think more people are aware of that opportunity and are utilizing it. But it just, I think when people go to the lake, they're used to other people being there. So I wouldn't say it's overly saturated. I do, Prince Edward County, I think it's quite saturated there just because of the tourism market that it's not just people going to relax for the week with their family. It's more getting out of the city, and there's so much to do in Prince Edward County. I've been there and done wine tours myself many times, and I haven't seen all the wineries, not even close. On my bucket list.
Yeah, I grew up in Southampton in New York, and I guarantee you that there's a bunch of places, wineries, locations I've never seen either. It just, the benefit of, the disadvantage and benefit of time, right? You can only fit so much in, but it also makes you want to go back to these areas, especially the super tourist, I don't want to say saturated, but tourist focused. So, Rosa, at what stage does somebody get a cottage? Like, are they looking at their second home, their third home? Like, what does it make sense for somebody to start looking into maybe wanting to get a cottage?
It's a combination. Am I not muted? Am I muted? Or am I good?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I think it's a combination. For many people, it's a second home. I think more people will buy a cottage as a second home. That's usually given. But for people who are looking to either retire or to move out of the suburban area to the cottage, it will be their primary residence. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, a lot of Tom and I, our clients have been moving out to these more recreational areas up north, as you may call it, wherever it is. And because you're working from home, you have that benefit of the accessibility to the internet. Rosa, in your case, you've got the accessibility to gas, you've got the accessibility to garbage. it's pretty much like the same thing as having a primary property, right?
And
So
beaches and fish and wine, and we're just so blessed. I'm so grateful. Fresh air and lots of stars. I mean, the stars, it's amazing. You look up at night, oh, it's incredible.
yeah, I agree. You can definitely do some serious stargazing there, and not be hindered by the lights of the city. You'd be shocked how much that actually pollutes your view until you're there in person yourself, right? And some people haven't had that advantage of kind of going to these locations in person yet, right? So that's great. Yeah, that wraps up our questions for this evening.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun tonight. I learned a lot of things. Diana, Rosa, you two are wonderful. Thank you for sharing all that information.
Nice to virtually meet everyone, and I enjoyed it as well. Thank you very much.
Outstanding. What a great group. Honestly, tremendous information. I learned things too. And thank you to Tom and to Eric for allowing us to be part of this.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right. Well, thanks everyone. And we'll be in touch. Have yourselves a good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.